I think the idea that Corbynistas have been, misty-eyed about Venezuela is largely a myth.
Chavez spoke up for people, and people around the world recognised that if they were marginalised, poor and dispossessed and trying to get their fair share of the cake, then Chavez was somebody that was on their side.
The Bolivarian revolution going on in Venezuela, where again the poverty was being addressed, employment was being raised, public services were being invested in, and literacy rates were being rising, a new health service was being founded and established. So here you had the contrast between capitalism in crisis and socialism.
Amnesty describe it as a state that engaged in lethal violence to strangle dissent.
Listen, I'm not saying it's perfect, and I'm not saying...
Bloody right. I mean, that's Amnesty International.
Actually, what's happened in Latin America and starting in Venezuela is that you're starting to see the construction of a new form of socialism in our time.
I think the importance of Venezuela is it shows that another way is possible. Obviously, it's got oil wealth, which makes a difference, but nonetheless, they sought to invest in the country and they sought to continue to fight poverty. Whereas in Europe, sadly, the implemented policies are making it much harder for poor people.
Chavez strode the world, inspiration to all of us. Fighting back against austerity and neoliberal economics in Europe showed us there is a different and a better way of doing things. It's called socialism, it's called social justice, and it's something that Venezuela has made a big step towards.
They've nationalised key sections of the economy. For example, they wanted to do a massive housing building programme. The cement industry wouldn't cooperate, so they just nationalised it, and on that basis have been able to start building housing in many of the so-called the shanty towns, the barrios of Venezuela.
And I think Chavez is so important for Latin America, the Caribbean and the rest of the region, because he showed another world is possible. He put helping the poor, raising living standards of the very poorest at the top of his agenda.
3 years ago, Corbyn's close advisor, Seamus Milne, met and interviewed Maduro for The Guardian, then expressed his solidarity a few weeks later.
Right-wing and the mainstream media all over the Western world and the opponents of Venezuela's revolution are crowing. They're saying the wheels are coming off, that it's an economic and political basket case. There's no hope for a post-Chavez Venezuela, and anyway it's a dictatorial regime that is violently crushing a wave of popular protest. Now of course that's very far from the reality.
And he showed the region that it was possible to do things differently, economically, socially, and also politically, that you could stand up to the United States.
Let me just ask you this question. Do you think you're closer to Chavez Maduro in your political philosophy or Tony Blair?
They are all having huge economic growth. They have over the last few years. They haven't collapsed, and they've massively reduced poverty in their own countries. So that's not true.
You're picking the second point,
well, they are socialist governments.
Countries that are far more free but maybe have higher tax rates are not socialist.
I fought 5 general elections in this country, so I know about elections. And it really was a robust and a fair and free process. They don't have postal votes, they don't have proxy votes, they have an electronic system. And all of the opposition people I spoke to conceded that it was indeed a free and fair election.
It's been said that Chavez was some kind of dictator. That's absurd. He and the Chavista movement have now won 17 elections and referendums in a process that has been internationally recognized as being powerfully democratic.
Ahora tenemos una llamada, me dicen, desde Londres tenemos una llamada de un amigo de Venezuela en contacto con Maduro desde Londres. Se trata de Jeremy Corbyn, parlamentario británico, militante y dirigente del Partido Laborista.
Felicitaciones para ti, señor presidente, y para todo el pueblo de Venezuela también.
Gracias, Jeremy, por tu llamada, por tu saludo. Aprovecho esta llamada, bueno.
This is one of the very richest countries on the continent of Latin America. It's a wonderfully endowed country, and it is completely bankrupt. Whose fault is that?
Well, I mean, I think there is very real problems in Venezuela, but I think it's important. Let me just go back to one point there.
No,
Jimmy
but whose
Carter
fault?
said
I
these
asked you whose
elections
fault it
or
is.
the elections in.
I asked you whose fault it is.
Well, let me just make this. Well, I'll come back to that, John.
Why don't you tell President Maduro just to stop?
I have made it very clear that there should not be any abuses of human rights or any violence or any abuse of free speech, of any abuses of human rights by anybody, including
the Trump answer.
No, wait a minute. No, it's not. You've seemed to have a very strange view of what Donald Trump does. This is a process that has to be resolved democratically within Venezuela, and the regional powers powers have offered to intervene to assist, and clearly any actions that oppress free speech are wrong.
But I notice you don't use the word government and you don't use the word Maduro, and they are to blame.
That includes the government, of course it does.
And President Maduro.
Look, it includes the government, and he's the president
Do
of
you
it.
condemn President Maduro?
Look,
your case is supported by Russia, China. You would hardly want to go to the wire on trying to defend them on human rights or anything
Mexico,
else. The fact
Bolivia, Italy. Come on, John.
Look, Mr. Williamson, you and Mr. Corbyn are in a very nasty corner now. You've got a country that is in terrible, terrible condition, and that is down to the people who ran it and the people you supported. Isn't it time you changed sides and got behind what is happening now?
John. The income tax, the top rate of tax in Venezuela is much lower than our own. When the oil prices collapsed, which they didn't prepare for that through the economy.
Are you saying that socialist Venezuela is collapsing because of oil prices?
No. The second point, one second. This is important. I think it's really important that we talk about what's happening in Venezuela. The second point is the imposition of exchange and price controls riddled with corruption, which have led to drastic shortages, which should not have been imposed, which were imposed supposedly as a temporary measure back in 2002, and of course calamity.
Corruption that is inevitable.
Let's have Kate coming back on your 2 points.
When you have state intervention and when you have state control in the way that Venezuela does, that corruption is inevitable. Let's talk about what's happening in Venezuela. Infant mortality is up by 10,000%. Inflation is up by 947%. Poverty has gone from 48% to 82%. The minimum wage, talk about some progressive utopia, is down by 75%. The murder rate is 10 times that of the global average. This is a socialist experiment gone truly awry. And sorry, I just have to follow this up very quickly. There had been many apologies made for years by the left, many Guardian headlines, many comments from the leader of the opposition, Jeremy Corbyn, from MPs like Diane Abbott. An apology is needed now. An outright apology. I don't care if Jeremy Corbyn's in Croatia. This has to be apologized for.
Does Kate have a point?